All right, everybody, welcome back to the Design, Build, Hunt podcast, which is presented by Whitetail Partners. Today, I'm joined by one of our new consultants, Scott Christison. Going to catch up with him about the results that he's seen so far on his property. Scott, welcome back, man. It's been a while since we got to record together.
It has been. Yep, it's been a couple of years probably, and back up in Canada to do it again.
Interesting rotation here. So last time we had you on, you were a client of ours and had received a plan from Tim. Now you're a consultant of ours. I do have to say, though, one of the coolest Whitetail Partners hats I've ever gotten came from you, sir. I see it there on your head right now.
Yeah.
My daughter took that from me and still wears it like every day. So
good. I'll get one over your way again. We've got a bunch of them. So
yeah, man, she just absolutely took that thing over, and I no longer get to wear it. So she very quickly stole that one from me. But Scott, I want to kick things off by asking you the question, man. What's that transition been like for you to go from Whitetail Partners client? You learn a lot through the consulting process. You start talking with us as a team, bring you on. Now you're one of our consultants. Tell me about that process for you.
Well, I think honestly, it was a pretty natural evolution. It just kind of transitioned from, number one with Tim, the guy's fantastic. So we built a pretty good relationship through all this, which I think it's important for people to know. You're not just buying a a plan. You're essentially creating a friendship and also creating a relationship with somebody who's a consultant. So, we keep in touch on other things and through asking questions and kind of working on our property, it just seemed like Tim's like, oh, that's a great idea. You could try that. And, it just transitioned into people wanting to see our property, knowing that we had it professionally done. So I've done some walkthroughs, and everybody was just kind of like, wow, this is awesome. Have you ever thought about doing this? And I'm like, yeah, I've talked to Sam a little bit. So, it just kind of evolved into that. And it was a pretty easy transition. We live 40 minutes from our land, so we're out there all the time, and we know the neighbors, we know the neighboring properties, and so everybody just wants to pick your brain. And even last year, guys were like, "Hey, we haven't seen a buck." I'm like, "Yeah, me neither. I have no idea where they went, but we were just holding them.
Right.
They were on our property." So,
yeah, man, that's great. And I think for you professionally, like it wasn't a huge leap to go from your profession to like into a consulting kind of space. I mean, you were already kind of doing that, just in a different field. Am I right?
Yeah, I've been a consultant with a company out of the Twin Cities, East Saltonson, owner of the same company up in the town I live in. So I've been a consultant for 20 years.
Right.
We sit down with businesses and put together plans for marketing and things like that. So same strategies, same people skills, just doing it with, I don't want to say something you love, because I love the business we run for our tech company, but when you can do this and be out in nature and help people chase, their weekend dreams or their passions, it's pretty easy to sink your whole heart and soul into it when you love what you do. So
yeah, absolutely, man. Absolutely. Well, the first time we had you on, we were talking about your property and your new plan. And I have to say, you are one of those guys that you're like the client that we want to work with. Not because you're just a friendly guy and easy to get to know and all of that. You were very clear on your goals. And then when you got that plan in hand, you guys went to work. And I think the first time that we talked, you were like, yeah, I got my plan this year and I'm 90% done. I mean, you had really hammered out a lot of work very, very quickly. I want to learn about how that process was for you of getting that work done. And then also hear about kind of the maturing process of your property since then. Like, what have the results been?
The plan, and I think we had this on the other pod, but we were on vacation when we got the plan, and it's the first time I've ever been in Mexico and couldn't wait to get home. And we got home in March, I think first week in March. And then that weekend, my wife and I were out and calling Tim to make sure it was the right tree we were starting with, but we started cutting. And, it's one thing that's nice about the plans that we have is they're so intuitive, like you can overlay them. And, so we started with the trails, and, that went smooth, and we cut in the bedding next, and then it led next to the food plots. And it didn't, it's different when you're at home and you have a project to do. You're like, where do I start and how do you get to the finish? But with the plan we had, it was very simple. Like it literally just led you to the next step. So we already knew what we were doing the next weekend, and my wife is very invested with this and she loves being out at the land. And so between the two of us, we just kind of went and took it piece by piece. And we were like, we got a lot done in this first month. We might be able to get this done this season. So we just, instead of hanging at the lake and doing stuff like that, we go out to the cabins on the weekend and work on the hunting land. And it just kind of seamlessly went together. And the only thing that held us back was a little bit of, it was the first year we ever had flooding on the property. So some of the areas we had planned for certain things we had to work around, but everything that we were able to do, minus a couple of low area water holes, we were able to get done. So, but it doesn't mean it's complete. We did it the first year, and then to kind of transition into your second question, we had a cool hunting property for that year. We didn't see a ton of the results the first year. Yeah, they traveled where we thought they were, but it wasn't like high quality deer. They were the same typical deer we were seeing. And then the odd rut buck would show up from we're not sure where and things like that. But it was very, once we had that first season under our belt and we had a year for that TSI to kind of come into play and the undergrowth come up and, the areas we were able to plant, our seclusion 360 and some of the micro plots we put in, once those started to mature, it was crazy how the property changed. Like literally you could drive to the cabin, and we have a 20-yard driveway on a big tornado zone that was part of the plan to keep the deer on their side of the property. And we had our yard because we still want to go out and barbecue and hang out. And, like you could drive in and you would see a deer 20 yards from you looking at you over that big tornado zone. Like, cool, you stay there, I'll stay here, we're good. You could walk to your cabin, you could unlock it, you go sit on the deck, you can start a fire, and they would just mosey right through to the bedding. But if you went through there to the other side, scattered. So really created like, this is yours, this is ours. And it's been really awesome because we can still use the cabin and the property, and we still have an awesome hunting piece that's all north of us.
Yeah. And we talked a little bit about off air, but that maturing process. So it's one thing to get your plan implemented and do all the work. It's another thing to give Mother Nature time to, for that understory to respond, for those food sources to come in and begin to peak, for our screens to begin to be very effective. About how long would you say it took? I mean, obviously, you're still in the transition process. This property is going to get better and better over the next couple of years, but I think now you've started to see the results. So about how long would you say did it take before you started to really see, wow, this has happened?
The first year was noticeable. Like the biggest, I think, and this is something for people that are implementing their plans to think about. It's a lot to cut down. We cut down probably 80 aspens that were 40 plus feet because we had a mature aspen woods in some of the property. So that's tough to do. You take that all down and you clean it all up, and then you look and you're like, this is so wide open other than the piles they're using for screening. So that was a little bit of a scare. And then the next year, I was like, oh, I can see some stuff coming up, but boy, this is thin, and then it really this year. So in the second season of it, it is insane. Like we even had to move some cameras because of growth that came up that wasn't there the year before, where we can't see the trail that was there. So it really, I would say if, that second year, like right now I have a property that we're comfortable that like it's holding deer and it's doing what it's supposed to. So, if you're a landowner that's making these changes, give yourself, obviously for us, it's a lifetime plan. We'll never sell this property, even if we buy another one, just because it has everything we've ever wanted. But now seeing the rewards, I wish I would have done it 5 years ago, because I'm already looking we're just starting our hunting season, but I'm already looking forward to next year because there's a few key things that I know that are going to really make it a place that, starts to hold the bigger mature bucks in our area.
Yeah.
So we're already seeing a few of the big, like we have our two biggest bucks we've had on the property since we've owned it this year. And they are core bucks. Like we have them from velvet right through till now.
Man,
so
that's awesome.
It's exciting.
I know for a lot of guys. So I'm in timber country, right? We just talked about one property I'm working on right now. It's 1,300 acres of timber from one end to the other. There's very little open ground on this place. And when you first start talking with the landowner about, hey, we need to cut these trees down, or we need to, man, that's a tough pill to swallow for a lot of guys. But like you said, if you do that work, when you start to see the response, that's when all of a sudden, wow, this property is getting where we want it. This is getting to be what we want it to be.
It is. Well, and the other thing too is once you see, there's a couple different things, like where we are in Minnesota, like where you are, at least if you're cutting timber, you can talk with your client and say, hey, you got some timber value here. So, there's some reward to doing this, not just the habitat piece, but you can use those funds to offset something else, or maybe get a dozer and a clear food plot. And here you couldn't get somebody to come pick up the aspen for free.
Hmm.
So that's where, it's a little tough because you're cutting all this and you still have to figure out how to use the property. So yeah, it was a little bit nerve wracking, but like I said, once you do it, like I said, when people see the rewards, it's pretty awesome. Like,
Yeah.
again, next year is going to be the blow up year for sure. Cause now all of our aspen regrowth is probably 6 to 8 feet tall, fairly wispy, but we're starting to get some of those 3/4 inch to an inch ones that leaf out. And like you're seeing pockets in the bedding where next year I'm going to have to go in and make some more areas for them to get through there.
Yeah. Man, that's fantastic. That's fantastic. Let's talk just a little bit about, how your plan went from obviously focusing on improving habitat, but including that huntability piece. I think the concern for some guys may be, well, like, hey, if I'm going to do all this work, and then it could make it really tough to hunt, and that absolutely can be the case depending on how you structure your habitat improvements. You can put a habitat improvement in a place that, and you just can't get in there and hunt it effectively. And
Yep.
for a lot of properties, that's okay because that's going to be our sanctuary. We're going to set it aside, but we're also trying to balance in the huntability piece. So tell me how that played out on your farm.
Well, and it's funny because sometimes you don't know what you don't know. And all the guys that are my buddies that hunt, most of them either have their own 20 to 30, maybe a 40, or they're family hunting farms and things like that, or they're leasing. So, we all hunt the same way. We just go, oh, there's big deer on the property. We're going to go in there and get one. And sometimes it works because you can go in and, harvest that deer on your first sit. But most of the time I was blowing out over half the property to get to a good spot.
Mm,
So the biggest change we made, that was literally restructuring the property to where ours is set up. I should have had, the plan, but like we have a racetrack that runs around the entire perimeter of the property. So at this point, we don't have a stand on our property that goes in more than 20 yards from any direction. And we have 8 locations we can hunt, but we kept the core, we improved the bedding there. But yeah, we literally, that was the biggest change in our property, 100%, was making it so I'm comfortable based on the wind to go sit on any of our stands and know that, and you still don't want to overhunt your property, obviously, but I can go sit 2 or 3 days in a row knowing that they're using that side of the property, and I'm walking in off of a gravel road through a trail 15 yards in, and they don't even know we've hit the property because they don't use that side. So location for us has been by far the number one different strategy. I mean, I was your typical guy. We had the coolest hawk blind. It was the first purchase we bought because we were so excited, and we probably spent more than that we did on a 4-wheeler. But it's sitting on the edge of a food plot that I walked across the big deer trail to get to, and then couldn't figure out why all the bucks were like not using that food plot, or if they did, it was at night.
mm.
I had a great location. I'm like, oh, they can't smell me. I'm in a closed blind. It's great. And then you just blew through 2 big main trails to get there.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
common sense.
Yeah. Right. The access piece, especially the perimeter trail, like you're talking about there, that in my mind is probably the number one thing guys can do to begin to improve the huntability of their property. And just even if they're not doing other habitat improvements, just hold more deer on your ground by not traveling through the core. That's a heavy lift at the beginning, though. And it's either a lot of work for you or it's an expense. I think you'd say it's been worth it, though, huh?
100%. And we actually just rented a DR mower because we made our trails. And actually, there's a video we have on our Instagram, but we kind of walked through some of the making of a trail. But we don't have any of our trails. They're not much wider than this.
Right.
We want them so that I don't have to drive my Ranger down the trail. I want a place where the deer feel comfortable. And even on those narrow trails, I have our really mature bucks make little sneak trails somewhere behind them just so they don't have to quite be on the main traffic trail. It's parallel to it, and you can see where they break off, come back on. They're not leaving that trail more than maybe 10 yards, but they're still not using the main one. They're making their own little ones here and there off the side. But yeah, I mean, I've had some people asking me, boy, your property is really, the pictures you're sending are pretty awesome. Can you look at mine? And they'll send me an aerial, and I'm like, those are your stand locations? I'm like, yep. And I'm like, you know what? We need to figure out how we get you on your property without walking through the whole core bedding area to get there. And they don't even think it's a big deal. They're like, well, I go in the morning. They don't hear me. I'm like, you could go in when the deer's not on the property, but if he comes in and smells where you're going, he's going to avoid that area.
That's right.
The human intrusion is tough.
That's right. And they're aware that we were there even after we're gone. I think that's the big
100%.
thing that is missing, is taking into account not just while you're in the stand. Like maybe they didn't bust you while you were in the stand, but maybe they pick up on your ground scent after you leave, or maybe they come and, smell where you walked in, or they, maybe you were sloppy on your exit. They smell where you walked out, or whatever. There's so many other factors where we can do damage even after we're gone and don't even realize.
I'm guilty of it even today. You're walking through your trail, you got your bow in one hand, your backpack, and you're like, move this out of the way a bit to get around. You just wipe that down with your hand. I mean, that's going to be there for days after if you don't have a rain, and so it doesn't take much. And the other thing is a lot of people will come through from the other side of a food plot because they know the deer aren't there. They're coming out of the bedding, but those deer are going to use that food plot. So the second they smell that human intrusion in there, they'll use it. They're just going to use it when you can't shoot them.
Right. Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely. So looking forward to what's next then for your property. You've got it pretty much dialed in. What are some of those big ticket things that are really going to help take it, refine it even more? We were texting yesterday, and I think you mentioned in the text, like, you can start to see the next things I need to work on now. Like, now that you've got the plan done, it's really highlighting those areas that, like, hey, I need to pivot my attention over to here. What are some of those big ticket things that you think are going to be, this off season's work list?
Well, and again, I don't know if we have a sickness or a passion for what we do. It's one or the other, but I'm in my stand, in a ladder stand, and I have a notepad in my backpack, so, cause I'll take notes when I'm up there. Cause I'm like, boy, from sitting up here, this is really open, or we need to move this. But, the thing after having our trails are 100% dialed in, like we made sure all summer, every trail we have is almost bare dirt. There's some areas where the grass comes back. It's a little tough, but they're definite trails, and the deer use them. So the trails are dialed in. The water holes in the right places were probably the biggest thing that we just added that really started to control the movement, because we have a river that runs through, but they don't use it a ton to drink, believe it or not. And if we put a water hole, it's community. Like, everyone goes by there and they check the scrape, and they go to the water hole, especially in the hot time of the season now. But I think our biggest next thing now is we're starting to add some of these dual action areas, for lack of a better word. Like, we're using a lot of sorghum now, I guess it is, or Milo, I guess they'll call it up here. But we're using it for screening right now, but then it becomes late season food in areas that used to be really open. So we can break a field up into 2, 4, 6 strips type thing. Or another thing we did that was kind of really cool is we used some HD plot screen, and we just basically build a 12 by 12 cross. And that's where that one buck I was telling you about, middle of the field, but he was bedding in one corner of that tic-tac-toe square, depending on which way the wind was coming. And he used that all summer in velvet. And so, that was the biggest thing that showed for our transition, is we still had a lot of open areas in what we would call CRP here. And so it's lowland, it's marshy. It's not like you have a lot of options to plant. So, with working with John Comp a little bit, we found some products that work in there, and we kind of just created, I know it'll be great late season food, but I needed it more so for my prime hunting screening and areas for those bucks to be able to travel and still feel comfortable and not see 40 yards to the other food plot. So that was the biggest glare for us when we started sitting up in some of these stands and overlooking the property. You could just see the bare spots. And that was our next step, was filling in those bare spots.
Yeah.
Because you can plant a tree, and we did 400 trees our first year, between evergreens and all the other stuff that Tim had recommended. We planted everything he said we should get, but they don't grow to my level of patience. So we had to find some options that are pretty immediate, and those are some great ones.
Yeah, I love that. What would you say, you've obviously been at this for a couple of years now. Now you're helping clients with their properties. What would you say is the most powerful lesson that you've learned just from taking your own farm through this process, kind of going from where you were a few years ago before working with Tim to where you are now? Like, what do you think is the biggest thing you've learned and taken away?
Like, basically just access was the biggest thing for sure. You know, you need to have a property. You could have the best property, and I don't care if you're in Ohio or Kentucky or Kansas or Minnesota, and you can have just the best property, but if you don't have a way to get into it, you kind of ruin that property. So that was for us, that was my biggest takeaway. And then it's just doing the work. You know, you trust the plan, and I'll tell everybody out there that starts on a plan, it's hard to make that first cut because you can't uncut.
Yeah.
But, you know, you trust the system, and, you know, the experience of the whole team we have, you know, and these aren't just plans where, you know, I go meet with a client and put together a plan for them, and this is Scott's way to do things. I mean, we have a team. Everybody bounces things off each other, and you know, we have all these different strategies, and they're checked and double checked, and with some, you know, good ideas and good strategies. So just trusting the plan and actually doing the work. That was the biggest takeaway from all of it.
Yeah, that's huge, man. One of the first things I say, so we create custom videos for our clients that talk them through, you know, every piece of the plan. And one of the first things, and I always have this as the number one bullet point of their to-do list, is to take the plan, take it in, go out to their property, walk it, flag it, do whatever they have to do to help them visualize it, and then make sure that they're fully bought in. Like, to me, that's the biggest thing. Make sure you're fully bought in, because it's those guys that are bought in who are going to do the work, and it's those guys who do the work who see the results. You know, there are oftentimes a lot of ways to get to the result that we're looking for. So I have on occasion had a client say, hey, you know, I understand what we're going for here. I'm not sure I'm sold on this method. Is there another way that we can accomplish that? Yeah, sure. There's 3 or 4 ways that we can accomplish it. Maybe we make a tweak, but I'm trying to get them to the point where they're bought in, because that's the point at which they're going to pick up the chainsaw, or that's the point at which they're going to pull out the tractor and start doing the work. You know what I mean? Like, we've got to get them moving on it, because that's where the results come from.
Yeah, no, and it is. I have a couple people in that same boat where it's like, well, you know, those trees have been there since my grandpa was there.
Right.
I'm like, all right, well, you know, you can selectively choose a few, and we can, you know, because that's, I guess, you know, you talk about your kind of 60-second, you know, what's your biggest hitter kind of thing, but, you know, find your stand locations first. That's the way, you know, that's my brain. You can make a deer go anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And so many people are doing it the opposite way, where they're like, well, the deer are here. How do we get there? And there's, you know it as well as I do, there's places where you just can't get there safely.
Yep.
You know, you can get in a stand and you can pretend you're hunting, but, you know, you're not going to have success. So you can, that was the one thing we did with the plan we had, because of some of the flooding we had, and on paper it looked great, but we had some places where we literally just abandoned that, moved a stand to a location that was easy for us to get in and out of, and then work backwards from that bedding area or that food plot to bring those deer to that stand.
Right.
You know,
yeah,
it was cutting some trees. We even have some places where we got some round bales from the neighboring farmer for $25, because we had to block off some big openings. Nobody says you can't throw a round bale on your property. So you just have to be creative, but yeah, you can make the deer go anywhere.
Right. And that's, you know, we go out on these properties and we're trying to find, what are the deer doing right now?
Yep.
But we've got to blend that with, what can we make them do after that? How do we strategically place habitat improvements so that we can hunt it effectively? And yes, there are going to be those locations that, well, the deer like to be over there. That's fine. If they're over there, we're going to wish them luck, and we're going to wait until they come over here, because the damage that we're going to do by hunting them over there is not worth the potential reward, because we may be rewarded on a hunt in there. We may not be, and we may ruin this area for the next several weeks. And so it's just not worth it. So how do we then, you know, manipulate the habitat so that we influence where they're moving? And then, you know, that's where the hunting strategy comes in, staggered with the habitat planning, I think.
Yeah, and it was funny when we walked our property the first time, like when we bought it, it hadn't been touched for 4 or 5 years, because it was an aspen plantation they couldn't log. They couldn't get on the other side of the river. So we had a ton of deer on that property, but they just used it wherever they wanted. And so it's almost worse having that, because you just can't go anywhere to hunt. So that was kind of, you know, again, like you said, we left them the core area, and we figured out how to bring them out now to the perimeter. And it's the most rewarding thing to just see the deer come out of the bedding in the dead center of the property, walk down the trail, go to the small food plot, go to the next trail, come right in front of your stand, 15 yards, and you brought them from 50, 60 yards in the middle of your property and stuff so thick you couldn't walk through there if you had to get in there to try and go through the property anyway.
Right.
So that's kind of the part that's fun for me, is when you can kind of create the script you want and they actually read it. It's pretty fun.
Yep. Absolutely. Well, last question, then I want to get into where kind of your service area is now that you're part of the Whitetail Partners Network. If you could give every landowner listening, or maybe it's just a guy with a lease or a guy with permission or whatever the case is, he's got a property and he has some ability to do something on it. If you could give them one piece of advice that's going to change the way they hunt their property, what would that piece of advice be?
Definitely, I would say, if you're, no matter where you are, and our territory's fairly big actually where we're at right now. Like, I'm kind of doing northern Minnesota, North Dakota, South Dakota. So we have a big area and different landscapes. But the one piece for these guys is, at the end of the season, walk your property. You'll see kind of where the traffic is, and then find a way to move that traffic out to where you want to hunt. I mean, that's the biggest piece of the puzzle. It's, again, you can have booners on your property all day long. If they're never coming out of that core area and you can't get to them, it's a tough hunt.
Right. And we're doing that through staggering some kind of interest feature, whether it be, better bedding that we're creating over here, or a food source we're creating here, or the travel corridor in between, or a mock scrape with a water hole. Lots of different ways to bring them over, I think, to where we want them to be.
Well, yeah. And I guess to give you a little more direct answer on that last question, the one thing I would tell these guys is get your trail system in order. Because if you don't do another feature on your property this year, if you can create, and we found this out the hard way because we didn't have Tim out there when we first got the property. We cut some trails thinking we were doing the right things. We had to work really hard to close those trails, because once you create that trail, deer are lazy. They will follow that trail nonstop. And so, get your trail system in order, go in and again, for most of the people where we are, it's not logging a bunch of trees, it's cutting brush. So, go to your local hardware store. Your advice to me was great. Get the insurance, and rent a DR mower, but just, mark off where you want to go, create your trails. If that's the one thing I tell these guys, if you have one season to get your property to perform as well as you can, and again, with these leases, you can't do a lot of stuff. You can't take a dozer in and create a food plot somewhere, but most of them are like, hey, if I want to cut some trails, yeah, that's fine. Trees will grow back and it's all brush. So that's the one thing I would say. If you can get in there and create your trail system, getting that to weave and meander so it gets out in front of where your stands are, those deer will follow that. You still then have to add the next feature of a water hole or a licking branch and a mock scrape so you can get them to pattern those spots and kind of set them up to be there when you want them. But at the end of the day, if you just create the trail and put trail cameras out, you're going to find the deer using those trails.
Yep, absolutely. Well, man, so you're covering northern Minnesota, North Dakota, South Dakota. If guys want to get a hold of you, pick your brain, or have you come out and take a look at their property, what's the best way for them to get a hold of you?
Well, I think our best resource to start would be obviously our website, whitetailpartners.com. I'm Scott at Whitetail Partners on Instagram. And then I would say for sure all the links are on for our socials are on the site. But yeah, go to the site, and there's a lot of good information there for everybody, and obviously they can get a hold of us that way. So
awesome. Well, Scott, man, it's good to get to catch up with you. I mean, we've talked over text and that kind of thing, but it's good to get to catch up face to face. It's awesome to have you now as part of the team. I know that part of the country was one that, we had guys servicing it, but it was a long drive for them. So I know they're happy to have you up there in that taking care of our clients there. And just super thankful that you're part of the team, man. Good luck to you this hunting season.